Biology, chapter 17, theory video 14. Now we are going to look at how the new species can be developed without a geographical separation. Now in the allopatric separation we discussed about the development of a new species or speciation occurring by the separation of a small group by geographical means. Now we are going to discuss they are geographically together, however still um, speciation occurs. This is known as sympatric speciation. And also what you need to understand is allopatric speciation is the most common way of new species being evolved. But still sympatric speciation is also possible. So for this to happen, there should be something that splits the population into two groups without, once again, it is just like separation, geographical separation. But here the thing is, even though they are together, there cannot be any gene flow between them. The same principles that led to the geographical separation or allopatric speciation should happen here as well. Now there are two species of palm trees endemic to Lord Howe Islands. Now these the first one is Havia fosteriana and Havia belmoriana. So these two types of, or two species of palm trees are endemic. That means they are found only in the Howe Islands, Lord Howe Islands. So these two plants are endemic in that, and endemic means they are naturally found in those in Howe Island only. But now they have been distributed throughout the world as house plants. They are these two species have different morphological features. That means they are characteristics, so they look different from one another. Their structural qualities are different. Now when you take Havia fosteriana, it has many flower spikes and straight leaves. Havia belmoriana, they have one flower spike and curved leaves. And the palms have different environment, different soils that they grow on. Fosteriana, they grow on calcareous or the alkaline soil. Then belmoriana grows on volcanic soils, which is high in acid content in it. So now what happens is their flowering times are, now they have the common ancestor. Now these two species became different because of the environmental conditions. Now as a result, what happened was their flowering times of these species are different. So as a result, there is a very little overlap between these pollination periods. So the pollination is almost impossible to occur. So as a result, what happens is, just like geographical isolation, they are reproductively isolated. So this has happened by about 5 million years ago. The ancestors of these two species, the common ancestors, came from Australia. That is, once again, they must have floated through the oceans and have landed on this island. Then they grew on neutral and acidic soils on the island. Then at one point, some seeds started to germinate on the more calcareous, that means calcareous soil, not calcareous, calcareous soil, that is having calcium carbonate. That means it has higher proportion of base content. So their pH values are different. Then some continue to grow on volcanic soil. They are actually adapted to that acidic conditions. So that as a result, what happened was they became genetically isolated. So the high pH values that they had resulted the plants that grew in more calcareous soil resulted in, because of the high pH content, they had different flowering times. It was affected by flowering times are affected. So when that happened, they could not be pollinated by the plants that grew on acidic conditions. So their the interbreeding did not happen. So this genetic isolation was made it to be separate to some extent, but then the selection pressure that was created as a result of the new soil or the acidic and calcareous soil gave them different morphological and physiological features, because they were they became more adapted to their new conditions. As a result, they begin to they began to live as different species. So here this chart shows how the flowering intensities do not have only a little overlap. So as you can see, Fosteriana, Havia Fosteriana, it's shown by red, the ovaries and anthers maturing. So they can be pollinated in this area, in this region. But when it comes to Havia belmoriana, it can happen in this region. So there is only a very little overlap here. This overlap will not be sufficient for them to develop as individual the same species, and as a result they develop to become separate species. This is known as an ecological separation. So the different types of soil provided the different ecological conditions. So as a result, new or different flowering times were introduced to both species differently, and they became genetically isolated over time and developed into two different species. In animals also this is possible. There is a species called there are two species of cichlid fish, Amphilophus citrinellus and Amphilophus saliosus. They live in the lake Apoyo in Nicaragua. They say it is understood that citrinellus colonized the land to colonize this lake 10,000 years ago. Then some organisms started to feed on the bottom, while the others started to spend time on the open water. So as a result, disruptive selection has come into play. So the selection pressures developed for these two different groups to have features that help them to feed at the bottom. So those animals had long jaws and long jaws and to burrow into the soil. Then there are other fish that then for hunting, or that for them to feed in mid water for the other animal, shorter jaws. They became very much different over time, that they are no longer able to interbreed now. They have different courtship behaviors, that is, they have different mating behaviors, and as a result they will not mate with each other. So this is an example of behavioral separation and ecological separation, right? So these are the two types of animals. So they are quite they are of the same ancestor, but now have developed into two different species. So now the ecology between the bottom of the lake and the top of the open water, they are different. So that means they are living in different ecological conditions. So as a result, their gene flow also would not flow. There is no gene flow between the two species. As a result, what happened was, there is a, as shown in the earlier situations, there is a difference between the two groups of individuals, and as a result two species have developed. Now what we need to understand is, we need to understand what caused the separation of the factors. Now this fish are not able to interbreed because they have different coat fish displays. So as a result, they will not be identified as mating rituals. But in the first place, the difference in mating behavior did not cause this to happen. They separated by the feeding patterns. So the mating behavior came after they were genetically separated. So the original group separated because of the differences in feeding behavior. So these characteristics also are important for you to understand. Write down a note on this. Sympatric speciation. The development of a new species without any geographical separation is known as sympatric speciation. Example: Havia fosteriana and Havia belmoriana. They are endemic to Lord Howe Islands. Originating from a common ancestor, growing on neutral or acidic soils originally. However, with time, some seeds germinated on more calcareous soils, within brackets high pH, that is high in base content. Because of the high pH level, the flowering times were different between the plants on calcareous soil and acidic soil. Later on, different selection pressures made them get adapted to their slightly new environment and resulted in different morphological and physiological differences. As a result, a new species was formed. This is an example of ecological separation. Put a dash and write down the separation of two populations because they live in different environments in the same area and being unable to breed together. Leave a line and write. Amphilophus citrinellus and Amphilophus saliosius, two species of fish having a common ancestor, developed characteristics initially because their common ancestors had different feeding habits. Some were bottom feeders, others were open water feeders. This behavioral separation prevented them from breeding together and ultimately evolving into two different species. I hope you understood. If you have any questions, please ask.